Welcome to METAPOD, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of METAPOD, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, and in this issue of METAPOD, we're going to talk specifically around how interim talent can come into play, particularly around operations side of the business. Not supply chain, not finance, not IT or whatever, but really wrapped around operational leadership and how that can plug and play and make a real difference. I'm really happy to have with us today my good friend and business associate, Stephen Cherlet, hailing from Montreal, Canada. And he speaks at least 2 languages very fluently, including French, which I'm wildly jealous about. He's going to be sharing some really good stuff with us here. So with that, Stephen, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, Ron. Thanks very much for having me on the METAPOD today. So my background is I have 30 years in operations in industry, including the aerospace business, included aircraft construction, as well as accessories, defense electronics, and industrial products. And currently, I'm the president and founder of FarStar Consulting here in Montreal. So I've been doing this for about 10 years now, providing both consulting and interim management services.
All right, awesome. A bit of backstory. Steve and I have a fair amount of history. We got connected through, I think, when I was teaching Lean Six Sigma online for Villanova. This is years ago. And then we ended up spending time with Stephen up in Canada, working with the company he was working for at the time. And since then, had been doing some interesting things around helping organizations solve difficult problems with talent. And here we're going to get into some diagnostics. I want to ask Stephen to share with us maybe 3 diagnostics for how do you recognize the opportunity, or at least the issues or challenges that you should consider. What are the things that can happen? And they would say, hey, we should be looking at, part-time, full-time interim talent as a potential solution around the operational challenges. So we're going to start with some diagnostics here. So I'll let Stephen tackle that.
Yeah, so there's 3 really big points that come to mind right away. The first is the aging and graying of the workforce. As we know, demographics are not on our side. Baby boomers are flowing through and all approaching retirement, and there isn't a great cohort of people necessarily coming in from behind. So we have to be careful about losing people from the top end of the workforce or the more senior end. And unfortunately, they take a lot of history with them, a lot of tribal knowledge. So that's a big thing to worry about. The second point is a high turnover, or what people are calling the Great Resignation. I don't quite like that term. I don't see it as like en masse, but we do see high turnover. People struggled a lot through the pandemic, and there's a lot of challenges and turmoil in business. And we see people taking advantage of that to maybe search for other opportunities with other firms. And the last point is just a general difficulty in recruiting and hiring. There's maybe fewer people for all of the positions that are open. They're maybe being a bit more selective in who they choose to work for and the working conditions that they really want to have surround them or accompany them in their next challenge. So those are the 3 big points that I think people have to think through.
Yeah, one of the challenges that organizations are running into, I actually did a recorded session earlier this week with the New Jersey chapter of the Association for Supply Chain Management. I believe that'll be available online as well. And one of the things that we talked a lot about is this, forever labor shortage phenomenon. And, the study that I was citing here is really, pointing at North America and the United States in particular. It was, provided a chart saying, the last decade of the 1900s, we had X percentage of new people entering the workforce in the marketplace. And that number has been coming down every year. It was like pushing 12% back then, and now it's down to about 6%. So it's kind of slope going in the wrong direction. Would you say that's true in Canada as well?
All these problems we're seeing here in Canada, I work with customers across North America, so Canada and the US, and I would have to say the challenges seem to be pretty consistent in both countries. Everybody seems to have the same issues around these 3 big points, especially the last one, which is recruiting and hiring.
Exactly. And the other thing we talked about, in this event earlier this week was how do you differentiate yourself and get better at being able to hire people? So we have a little fun around, the 3 key things you should be doing in this organization. So I'm not going to digress because I might get into some of the tips and tricks you're going to present here in a few minutes. So here's the three things I just heard here. So make sure I got all this straight. The three big things you have to stop and think about. Are you a victim of the aging, the graying of the workforce? I'll call it the forever labor shortage phenomena. Or are you having issues with turnover for good or bad reasons? And, the Great Resignation took place, of course, during the COVID pandemic, early years, and that phenomena continues on. And then just difficulty with hiring, which has lots of pieces to it, with respect to, workforce available in a given area, competition for those folks, all these things that come into play. So let's say that, our audience has kind of done their diagnostic and said, yep, at least one, if not two or three of these are real issues for us. What would be your advice? Kind of, what do we do about that? What would be the actions, the steps people could take to actually get ahead of that? So I'll let you tackle those one at a time.
You bet. Thank you for that. So let's talk first about the aging and graying of the workforce. There's three big bullet points I see around that. The first is really succession planning. A lot of firms kind of put this off, or they seem too busy, or maybe don't apply the right importance to it. I believe succession planning is key. It needs to be formal. The plan has to be updated regularly. And part of it means having a discussion with your people and understanding their needs and see what some of their timelines are or what they're looking for, so that you can incorporate that into your succession plan. And you should also go a couple levels down. So for a position, look 2 levels below so that you can see who's inside. You might find there isn't anybody. And so then you can start to have a game plan around that. The second point is transition planning. So in this case, we can maybe identify people and a timeline that they may want to leave on. So we could work on things like a retention agreement. So we could put that in place to make sure they'll stay or motivate them to stay. And another big thing is to make sure that when there is turnover, that we try to have it so that people can shadow their replacement. I've seen, unfortunately, where too many companies have somebody leave on a Friday and the new person show up on a Monday, or they think that maybe a 2-week overlap is more than enough. And I think experience shows that that's not quite true. The best you can hand over in 2 weeks is where your files are stored. Really what we want, though, is to hand over some of that knowledge and insight into the organization and your team. The last point is something you can't really plan around, but you can try to be ready for, and that's unplanned health events. As people are aging, then health issues can become a problem, and possibly not just for themselves, but for close family members where people are going to need some time off. So you could end up with a bit of a hole in the organization while people struggle with the timing to look after close family members as well as possibly their own potential health issues.
All right. So before we go on to, the second set of suggestions, because you're really kind of focusing here on kind of the graying of the workforce and aging graying, not as many people being available to us to hire. And, I really liked here what you brought up, succession planning, et cetera. We always talk about that. But as a practical matter, we never seem to get the traction we need, the attention of the organization to really do that well. Do you have an example where you were successful with that? And what was your strategy to actually get the organization to pay attention?
Well, I can't take credit for it personally. What happened is the board mandated that it be done. So leadership from the top is key. I would suggest to people respectfully, maybe they want to come to this conclusion on their own before the board guides them, if I could be so delicate as to put it that way. It does take time, but it really forces you to go and look through the organization and assess your talent. So it's a great tactic anyway, and people should do it, but we do need to see leadership from the top. Otherwise, at the mid-level and lower, everybody's busy with the day-to-day, so we do need to make it part of their focus. And maybe becomes part of somebody's annual objective plan. At the beginning of the year, when you sit down with your supervisor, maybe that's something that should end up on your worksheet as something to be done over the course of the year.
Okay. Let's pretend that we have one of those episodic things happen, right? You mentioned, personal or family health issues, aging parents. And I know I certainly had loud challenges with aging parents the last several years. And then if you still have children at home and they begin to have children, now you have grandchildren issues, to say nothing if you have young children of your own. What are situations where, or, what's your experience basically around having success tapping into interim talent, be it part-time or full-time, to kind of fill the void until those things get solved?
Yes, we've seen that well in our business. It's obviously an unfortunate circumstance, but the organization has to react and to deal with it. Where the absences are shorter in duration in nature, people generally try to work within the organization to find somebody who can fill in. And possibly that's a great point for your succession plan to come in. So somebody can maybe come up and fill the role for a short-term basis. But unfortunately, it usually just leaves a hole the next level down and so on. So this is where interim talent can really play, especially if it's going to be a longer-term event. Sometimes, this can be weeks or months. And that's where interim talent can really come into play. So those are usually very experienced senior resources who can walk in, understand the scenario or the situation on the ground, and really hit the ground running. So that's a great solution for a temporary basis.
Yeah, you said something there very important at the end. I want to make sure nobody misses that. Is that there's probably 2 or 3 really crucial things. If you are going to tap into interim talent, there's probably a couple, 3 questions you should be asking, and making sure you understand about that individual. You mentioned a couple of things there. What else might you, do to that interim talent?
We really like to look at interim talent in terms of their experience and expertise. And it's ideal, of course, if they understand your business or your industry and they have that relevant experience, because it means they don't have to understand foundational aspects of the business. So that's very important. And the other is to make sure that they've got sufficient senior level experience, especially if you're, say, looking for a temporary CFO. You'd like somebody who's already done that and possibly done it for a decade or more, rather than somebody who's held the role but for a short time, or maybe it's a step up for them. So you really want people that are well-grounded, as I say, ideally understanding your business, but who have really worn the mantle of the role for a while.
Okay, very good. Awesome. So let's move on then. Or what do you do if you're a victim of the Great Resignation or experiencing lots of turnover? What are some of the actions you should be considering to get out in front of that?
So the first thing that I really like to focus on is development and career planning. People want to know that they have a place, that they have a future, and maybe see what a roadmap is. And what's really helpful is to invest in that staff. So it could be in specialty training or in advancing their knowledge in an area, or possibly even outside the functional area that they're working in today. People will see that as the organization making an investment in them. It helps improve their motivation, and that can only help in the retention. The other area is to focus on coaching and mentorship. So help people grow into the roles, provide senior level coaching, possibly from the level above. In my career, I was fortunate when I was at a senior level. I had a board member take an interest in my career. So he kind of guided me. He provided these sort of tips and tricks. Have you considered this? Have you thought about that? Have you asked these questions? That I found very helpful. So he didn't tell me any answers, but he did guide me to explore and understand things better on my own. And that was a huge help. But when we talk about coaching and mentoring, it can be the other way around. So we can maybe ask some of these people to coach and mentor people below them. So it's a two-way street, receiving as well as providing coaching. And that really shows that you're interested in keeping.
And I don't suppose the fact that board member took an interest in you had any impact on your desire to stick around.
It certainly did. And there was a relationship that continued actually after I did leave the organization after some time, but I did keep in touch with that board member for quite a few years after. So it was a very helpful learning relationship.
So what you're describing there is the pretty low cost and, I'll call it minimally invasive demand might make on the organization. But I can't think of, I certainly benefited from really good mentors in my career as I was coming up. But I never really experienced with an organization that's truly taking that to heart. And so thank you for sharing that example. So what else might we do if we're victim to the Great Resignation?
The last thing is just incentive plans for people. And when I say that, I don't mean just money. Money helps. It doesn't hurt. We all know it's kind of a foundational aspect to compensation. But people are looking for more than that nowadays. They're looking for working conditions. I have a former colleague that I was trying to help place with an organization. And for him, it was all about whether he could work remotely or not. Right. And that was going to make a big difference in the types of positions and the locations where he would accept roles. And certainly the pandemic got everybody attuned to remote work. I mean, it does also help, though, that organizations who are willing to have people work remotely have a bigger catch pool now of talent, right? They can go further. But it could be other things. It could be just conference attendance. It could be extra days off. It might be other things. I've seen companies consider gift cards and small tokens of appreciation and other ways to show that they've acknowledged the contributions that their staff are making. And all these small things can add up.
I've got a couple of follow-on things for you in this one. Yeah, I mentioned the Association for Supply Chain Management New Jersey chapter, and I did an event with them on dinner. It's kind of what they call a professional development meeting, and it was an online event. And we had a large group of supply chain professionals involved. I think 15 people participated in some survey questions and stuff during that online meeting. And I had a little fun with, if you're going to be the employer of choice, right, to fight this great resignation problem and turnover, et cetera, there's lots of different strategies, right, to do that. And I created this list of 10 different things that organizations should be looking at, right, to combat that problem of not being the employer of choice. And interestingly enough, you may resonate with this. Of the 10 things, I stuck a ringer in there myself. I did a little research. And I stuck in there making a difference or feeling like you make a difference in your job. And I was pleasantly surprised that 9 out of those 15 people, of the top 3 things that they would see as, important to them to stay with a company, 9 of those 15 people specifically picked feeling like I made a difference. So that doesn't cost much to do, but you have to be thoughtful about that. It kind of ties back to company culture, right? So I like to say to organizations, you have a company culture, whether you realize it or not, it's just automatically going to happen, right? So we get to decide as leaders, am I just going to let culture happen to me, or am I going to purposefully develop a culture that honors people make a difference with the way we behave? So I didn't know if that would foster, I'll just, feeding into what you said. I think we have another point to make here around, I think your next point was around culture. Please share that thought.
Now we're talking about trying to hire and recruit, and positive culture is a big thing. And I think you touched on that very well. And it has to come from the top. Leaders have to model the behavior that they want their employees to replicate and to model below them. So it really does come from the top, and it's very important that people do that. But a positive culture is going to attract people. I had one great experience, and it was well before the pandemic, where we had a location that was a little bit remote, northeastern United States, and there wasn't a big catch pool of people, but we offered training. We decided that we would invest, and what we offered to people was we would pay half their time and they would invest half their time. So everybody had some skin in the game. And we went from a dearth or dire straits of recruits to people coming up, knocking on the front door and telling us, I hear you offer training. Can I please work for you? That was a tremendous learning experience. So culture is important. Attractive working conditions. So we've got to make sure people have got reasonable conditions that they're working in. One factory that I was involved with, it was cold in the winter. Everybody had electric heaters underneath their desk to try to keep their toes warm. So we invested as an organization in replacing the entire building envelope and redoing the inside to really spruce things up. And people really felt that the company had paid attention to their concerns and was reacting to it. And I think the other element of this is just a learning environment. Just offer people opportunities to learn, invest in them, company-sponsored training plans, whether it's internal or offering to pay people's tuitions and books for night school courses, or even membership fees. I've seen organizations refuse to pay something like even the annual membership fee to the ASCM. I've been a member since the early 90s, but it's a small price to pay. And I've seen companies actually refuse to do that, which is really unfortunate because it sends exactly the wrong message. And for $160 a year, you could have won somebody over rather than pushing them away.
Yeah, I remember years ago visiting you in Montreal, and I seem to recall you had something on the wall, something about a versatility diet. Did I remember that correctly?
Well, I had implemented a plan at the time of paying for knowledge, and that was both for staff, and we were working with our union to also embrace that for our hourly employees, where we were trying to entice people to learn multiple roles and different work outside of their normal grade. And if they were multi-capable, if they could do two different tasks, say assembly and test, we paid a premium so that whether they did one or the other was irrelevant to us. We paid a little extra, but we had the flexibility. Because otherwise you were trying to monitor when people were working out of grade and calculating the differences. So we said, we'll pay you a little bit extra, an amount that was negotiated, and we'll just pay it to you all the time. Because if we need you to assemble, you will assemble. And if we need you to test, you'll test. And if we need you to paint, you can paint. And that gave us so much flexibility. And it may have cost a little bit more, but the fact that the people were ready, willing, and available really made a difference. And on the staff side, at the time, I was responsible for one department, IT. And for that team, we basically offered for every step that they worked on towards their Microsoft Certified System Engineering certificate, that we'd give them an annual raise. So there were 6 steps towards that certificate, plus the certificate itself. So you could get 6 little mini pay raises in as short a period of time as you're willing to invest in that level of education. So it wasn't huge, but it was enough that you did all the steps. It would have made a difference.
Could you describe for the audience, the notion of versatility diagram, how that can be helpful for the culture problem?
Yeah, so for that one, we basically had diagrams on the shop floor where we showed all the people who worked in that area.
We have the left side of the list, right? The bottom, top to bottom on the left side of the diagram, what goes out there at the top?
That's right. So we had the people on this down the side with their pictures. And then we had the skills across the top. And then we had like a pie chart that showed whether they were learning, which would be like a quarter of the piece of pie, or if they were fully trained, or if they were at the point where they could train, at which point all 4 quarters of the pie would be filled in. So anybody walking by could see who was ready, available, and capable. So sometimes, if you had a supervisor was off sick and somebody else would fill in and didn't know that team very well, they could go up and look at the versatility diagram and then go and look for that person by name and by face and ask them to maybe switch over to another role for the next period of time.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm going to suppose that situations occur, and I have a reason for saying this, where, we need to be doing coaching and mentoring. We need to get a versatility diagram program going, et cetera. But that doesn't mean you have anybody that actually knows how to do that. And it's not something you necessarily would want to hire a full-time employee to do. And I'd like you to think of an example of how, a coach could potentially plug in and help with some of these challenges you talked about on an interim basis. So the reason I'm bringing this up is I had a call yesterday with the president of a $20 million manufacturing company. And, he's really frustrated because he brought in a guy on the operations side who got some lean manufacturing stuff underway, right? And beginning to put in place, some good practices. And then he ended up exiting. And then he had another individual kind of rise through the ranks to take the role that knows a lot about lean manufacturing, but hasn't demonstrated the ability to actually do it, right? Get to the floor, really get dirty and work with people long enough so they can actually implement some of those practices. So he said, look, we need an interim person that can step in here because this is his words. I wasted $900,000 in efficiency in the last 12 months. It's worth it to me, spend a couple $100,000, get somebody in here and sort that and just work with people and get this indoctrinated in our culture. He says, because it makes him use a lot of cuss words here. It makes me crazy. And I don't know what this is worth to me. So we just need to invest in that. But I don't want to go hire or replace this guy. I want him to be mentored and developed and really understand how to actually go do it. And then have that interim person go away and off we go, continue to build the company, but building those skills within the team. So that's kind of my story. You have an example of how as a practical matter, you had any success with you being tapped into or knowing of an example where, we could actually help the organization make a move with some mentoring and coaching that's either part or full time. So great, Barry.
I see a couple of points to that. So one is when people are looking to hire, maybe they need to consider that especially with the dearth or the shortage of talent that's out there or the people that are interested, you may not be able to wait long enough to find somebody that's a perfect fit. So find somebody that's close who has the right enthusiasm, motivation, and intensity to want to learn, and hire somebody that you could train up to the role, and use somebody from the outside who has the experience who could help them and coach and mentor and bring them up to the level that you're hoping for. The other point that you mentioned just around the coaching and mentoring, we see that often. We've had people call and say, we've had somebody senior leave. We have some junior people that we'd really like to develop rather than hiring from the outside above them. Can you send somebody in to help and work them up to the level so we can develop internally and show? So we could really walk the talk a little bit where we say, people are important and we develop from inside. So when you bring somebody in to help elevate your staff, you actually show, you're modeling the behavior, right? You're showing that the things you put on the wall on your culture charts, you're actually doing. So this is a great approach. Bring somebody in who's done the role, who's got lots of experience, who possibly has a real solid background in your business, and have them bring your staff up. And then you can just allow those external folks to go and find something new and challenging.
Awesome. That was fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. We're going to get into the wrap up now. If you don't mind, would you be willing to share with the audience if they wanted to learn more, discuss some of these challenges with you, how would they get in touch with you?
The easiest thing is by email. So my email is very simple, and it's Stephen with a PH, STEPHEN at FarStarConsulting.com. All one big word. Our main office number is 438-800-4904. And our website is very simply FarStarConsulting.com, all in one big word. So we're easy to get to. Just look up FarStar. Usually we come up very well in the search engine.
Awesome. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us.
Ron, thanks very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
All right. With that, to our audience, I hope you can join us for the next episode in this series for this month, really focusing in on how do we leverage interim talent to solve those difficult problems. And we're going to pivot to a different functional focus in our next episode. So be sure to join us for that.
Thank you for joining METAPOD. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.